Well, it's indeed a pleasure to follow the governor and his thoughts today that he shared with us regarding the future of the beef industry. For those of you that I have not met yet, my name is Mark Russell. I'm the Executive Director of the Beef Industry Council in the state. And it's my pleasure today to help moderate this. And as I talked to the staff on Friday morning, I said, really, what do you want me to do on Friday? And they said, keep everybody on time. So I'm kind of behind already. But I'm going to try to keep everybody on time. Tom, I may need your help at times to to roll them into a little bit quicker time frame. A few housekeeping things. Restrooms, if you haven't found them already, if you go out these doors, they're down here on the hall to your left. If you need to make a phone call or your phone's going to be bothering you, step outside. I've been told that some of you probably have already bought parking today, but if you didn't or if it's going to run out, I've been told not to worry about it, that if you get a ticket, you turn around and call that number on the back and say, I was here for the Beef Summit, and there's not going to be a parking charge. There's not going to be a ticket that you are going to have to deal with later on. So I'd like to go ahead and get started. A couple of the people that's going to kick this off today are folks I've known for a while. I had a chance to work with the Department of Economic Development from 2007 to 2011. And I actually worked in the Department of Agriculture from 1986 to 1993 when the Agri-Missouri program was getting kicked off. So both of these are extremely important, I think, to Missouri, to agriculture. And when I worked in economic development as really a business development person for agriculture, I had a chance to really kind of get a touch and feel for how the ag industry affects each and every citizen really in the state of Missouri. So I'd like to introduce both of them at the same time, and they'll come up and make their comments, and then we'll bring the rest of the economic panel up. Richard Fordyce is a fourth-generation Missouri farmer from Bethany, and he was named the Department of Agriculture's director in December of 2013 by Governor Nixon. He's held several leadership roles throughout agriculture. The Soil and Water Districts Commission received the 2012 Soil Conservation of the Year from the Conservation Federation of Missouri. He's also worked in positions of leadership with the National Biodiesel Board, the Soybean Merchandising Council, Ag Leaders of Tomorrow, University of Missouri Extension, Northwest Missouri State Fair. He's one of three directors from Missouri on the United Soybean Board. He and his wife Renee and their children have soybeans and corn, as well as a beef cow herd close to Bethany in Harrison County. So we're pleased to have him. He's been a voice of agriculture and a voice for the beef industry already in our state. Joining him will be Mike Downing. Mike and I had a chance to work with Mike, like I said, for a few years. He works tirelessly for the state of Missouri. He's also a rural Missourian from Kennett, Missouri. He holds a graduate degree from the University of Missouri, and he's just worked extremely well, I think, through the state of Missouri, not only in agriculture but other aspects of the economy. So I'd like to welcome both of them up to the stage, let them make some comments, and then we'll continue on. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And, we are a little behind, so I'm going to try to go through this really quickly. This is kind of the kickoff. But what I wanted to say before I started with some brief remarks is that this summit is your summit. This is an opportunity for you to participate. We're going to have an opportunity, as I said earlier, some great panelists, hopefully some great discussions, an opportunity to learn and share. But this is a time for you to ask questions. This is a time for you to provide your input, and so I encourage you to do that. I think today I think the motivation for today is to try to chart a path and figure out a way that we can keep cattle in Missouri longer. And as the governor indicated, if this doesn't work in your operation or whatever you're doing, then you do what you feel is necessary. But what we're trying to do today is to build a platform that we can, frankly, keep cattle longer in Missouri. So instead of, cow-calf cow, which is what we are, we have about 170 mother cows, and by and large, we sell feeder calves, and they go somewhere. We go to the livestock market, and they go somewhere. I'm not sure exactly a lot of times where they do go. And I know there's a lot of you in the room that do exactly the same thing. So the motivation, again, for this summit is to provide opportunities and ideas as to how we can maybe change that culture just a little bit. In order to get things started, I wanted to emphasize some numbers I think that are very important. Today we know that approximately 1.7 million calves are born in Missouri each year. Animal agriculture is a huge, huge business here in the state. Just $1 million in production in the beef segment yields approximately $3 million in total economic activity, $500,000 in household wages, and 20 additional jobs. Again, just $1 million in the beef industry. Unfortunately, when our cattle leave the farm, most of them leave the state. And the nearest numbers that we can put together is about 72,000 head out of the 1.7 million are ultimately finished here in the state of Missouri. And if you look at those numbers, that is equal to less than 5%. So 95% of those cattle that we are doing such a great job of raising, of doing the research and doing our homework and creating superior genetics are leaving the state. So again, my opinion as a cattle producer is states like Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska are taking advantage of the hard work and the commitment that we've made as cattle producers. They're taking advantage and putting value on those cattle outside the state. As been mentioned before, Missouri ranks second in cow-calf inventory, and that is great news. But given a lot of issues, the 2012 drought probably the biggest contributor, Missouri's cattle production has declined 13.3% since 2003. While that is not encouraging news, Texas's cattle inventory has declined by over 20% in that same amount of time. Oklahoma has increased just slightly at just over 0.2%. What's not so great is that even though we retain a top ranking in inventory, we lose major ground in value and sales. At $1.9 billion, Missouri ranks 9th in cattle sales. So, number 2 in cow-calf production, and by the time we take into consideration sales, we have dropped down to 9th. We rank below Texas, $13 billion, Kansas, $10 billion, Iowa, $4.5 billion, Colorado, $4.3 billion, and so on and so forth, down to Missouri at $1.9 billion. One of the main things we want to talk about today is how to add value. And just a few days ago, I don't know how long it was, but J.P. Dunn and Ken Strumpf in our Ag Business Development Division at the department went up to the Wassman Farm just outside of Boonville and looked at their hoop beef buildings. And they shared with us some impressive information on some of the value they're able to add by utilizing these structures. They told us that that a 320 head operation, which is the size of the hoop building that they have there just outside Boonville, 320 head operation produces, and this is if you're taking them to finish weight, produces about 1,000 ton of manure each year. And those of you who are cattle producers, those of you who are cattle producers and corn growers, those of you who have diversified farming operations, you know what 1,000 ton of manure and the benefits that can provide to your farm. Each ton of manure is equivalent to $2,500 in nutrient value in today's prices to subsidize your commercial fertilizer purchase. So 1,000 tons of manure in a 320 head building is equal to $25,000. $25,000 check that you're not writing to buy fertilizer to put on your crop. And depending on nutrient requirements and yield goals and those kind of things, 1,000 ton of manure could fertilize 100 acres of corn, or if you want to do the comparison, probably 300 acres of pasture land. So you can see that we have a lot of room for growth, and that's why we're here today. Our cattlemen and cattlewomen are doing an awesome job, and we want to use that incredible groundwork laid by them as a springboard to capture even more value, more economic benefit here in Missouri. So with that, again, I think you're going to be impressed by the folks that are going to be up here talking to you today. And again, thank you for being a part of this Beef Summit, and please participate as we go through the day. With that, I would like to introduce the Director of the Missouri Department of Economic Development, Mr. Mike Downing.
Thank you, Richard. I know Richard's a smart guy, and how do I know that? Because he's running around the state doing business of agriculture, and I always ask him, I said, who's minding the farm? He says, my wife. So I know he's a smart guy. And she's here today. So somebody's not running the farm then. It's an honor to be with you here today to talk about agriculture and growing our economy, especially our rural economy, which we're very concerned about. This is my favorite subject and one that Missouri continues to earn an A on. We've experienced a record year for economic development, both the number of new jobs and the amount of capital investment right here by growing companies. For the first time, we earned a gold shovel for attracting new high-value investments. Cerner, which is creating 16,000 new jobs in Kansas City at the Old Bannister Mall, is considered the largest project not only in Missouri, but in the southeast region of the United States. 3 corporate community investment impact awards, more than any other state. We've moved up the charts as one of the top pro-business states in the country. For the first time, as the governor mentioned, Polina decided to recognize us as the top economic development agency, and we're very proud about that, along with our partners all around the state. I've had more than 32 years in economic development, and I've seen some really good things happen in the state. And just in the last few years, most of this has been done under the leadership of Governor Nixon. We've heard the world grumble about downward spiral in the automotive market. Sales were slowing a few years ago. We had a couple of plants close in Missouri, the Chrysler and Ford plants in St. Louis. But we've had a great auto resurgence in the last few years. The governor launched the Automotive Task Force, I think, on the first day on the job. He signed a piece of legislation a few years ago as a game changer for Missouri. General Motors has made several announcements over the last 3 years to grow, adding 750 new jobs for the third shift of the Canyon. I think they've had 2,000 total new jobs in the last several years, with about $400 million new at Canyon. And the Canyon and the Colorado, if you've not seen it, was Motor Trend's #1 truck. Now, Missouri happens to have Motor Trend's top 3 trucks made here in Missouri. So it's the Canyon, the F-150, and the Transit. F-150, if you've not heard, there's a new variation coming out from Kansas City. It's an aluminum body, 600 pounds lower, more torque, and better gas mileage. So that's a great buy for us also. Ford's added $1.1 billion in investment since 2011. With a couple of thousand jobs, we can see that Transit really selling. I think Charter Communications by itself has ordered 600 units of the Transit van, and it's really a dandy vehicle. Dozens of suppliers around the state, all over the state, both domestic and foreign companies. Merrick, our research agency, reported that the 14,000 retained and auto supplier jobs and the $2 billion in capital investment in Missouri is expected to support an additional 21,000 jobs in the state. Harry Truman once said, "Progress occurs when courageous, skillful leaders seize the opportunity to change things for the better." And because of the leadership in this state, all around the state, in this room also, we were able to change the course of devastation and pilot a new path for growth. Rather than losing the Ford and GM plants in Missouri, we're working to grow them and good-paying jobs in Missouri. Now, I'm no expert on beef. I grew up on a cotton and rice farm down in southeast Missouri. I don't think there was a cow within 100 miles as far as I know. But at the end of the day, we're talking numbers and making more goods in Missouri, making more jobs in Missouri. There's a lot of opportunities growing the beef industry in Missouri. All the pieces and players here, as Richard mentioned. We already have approximately 53,000 cattle farms and 140 animal processing plants in Missouri, employing over 16,000 people. If Missouri grows the cattle herd, there could be an opportunity to add a processing plant. If we were to build just one beef processing operation, we could create 1,200 jobs right off the bat with sales in the hundreds of millions. Adding these jobs is estimated to spur over 1,000 additional jobs, with supply chain companies and businesses benefiting from worker spending. In addition, we would naturally see our beef exports grow. In 2012, Missouri exported $150 million in beef goods in 2012, up from $141 million in 2011. And when we're growing our export presence abroad, we're growing opportunity here at home also. More desire for Missouri-grown products, more money coming back to Missouri, and more jobs. If I can borrow another wisdom from Harry Truman, a pessimist is one who makes difficulties of his opportunities, and an optimist is one who makes opportunities of his difficulties. Well, the last few years we've been presented with some difficulties, but there's an opportunity to do more and to do better. Let's change the game for Missouri beef. Thank you very much.
All right. While I'm making just a few comments, the rest of the economic panel, if you'd be making your way up here, that'd be great. Dr. Parcell, Dr. Brown, Dr. Plain, Jeff Case, and Dave Janish, if you could be working your way up here. I did want to mention that if you need to get on Wi-Fi, the password is asterisk, Truman Tiger, and then another asterisk, so you can get on that way. If you're on Twitter today and you're wanting to tweet, it's hashtag MoBeefSummit. So I've told a few of you about that, but we'd like for you to keep communicating what's going on today through our social media channels. I think it's going to be a great opportunity to reach out past just the folks in this room today. So I want to do that. Instead of me introducing folks, if they want to do some self-introduction, I'm gonna encourage them to do that. That way we can kind of get back on schedule. It looks like to me everybody's up here. I've got an order. It's going to show you, Joe, as the start. So I'm going to let Dr. Joe Parcell, Department Chair of the Department of Ag and Applied Economics at the University of Missouri, start, followed by Dr. Scott Brown, then Dr. Ron Plain, Jeff Case, and then ending up with Dave Janish. I would hope that we'll have some time for questions. So some of the questions that you have, I want you to kind of get ready to ask them, because I think that may be the most important part of this day, is the opportunity to ask these panelists questions that's on the tip of your tongue. So Dr. Parcell, I'll let you get started.
Thanks, Mark. Is this working here? Can you hear me okay? Okay. Thanks, Mark. Being a K-State alumnus, I can attest to the governor's comment. In Manhattan, there's no love for Jayhawks. So, there. I want to take a few minutes and just highlight some things that, as I look at value added in the beef industry, and I want to be quick about this. What I try to do is I just try to take some generalities out there about within other industries is that we've added value. And I looked at some standpoint, if we could just keep 25% of those cattle in the state for another 100 pounds, what might that mean? And I'm going to give some ranges here in terms of, based on prices, both of the cattle commodities. It's going to take several million additional bushels of corn. We're looking at adding another between $50 and $100 million to the economy in terms of what it's going to take to feed those out. We're looking at adding value to that corn. Remember, we're moving cattle around. They're going to be fed somewhere in the United States, so this isn't going to be all new production just here in Missouri. We're looking to add between $6 and $10 million per year per 100 pounds gained on those 25% to Missouri crop farmers from that. If we keep those animals around another 100 pounds, depending on the price of beef, we're looking at adding $1 to $1.5 additional million dollars in commissions to those livestock auctions that would stay in the local community. We're looking to add at least another 300 additional jobs per 100 pounds we'd put on if we keep those, and that's not including processing, but we keep them into further processing. The tax changes and implications there are going to be dependent on profitability, and I'm not going to make a judgment on that. And being a farmer in my lifetime and knowing farmers, that money might all get spent locally on implements anyway, so I'm not sure how that'll end up, but that's all good for the local economy as well. One of the things that is critical as I look out there, and I think the governor did a good job of pointing out that if you could add another $1 billion to $1.5 billion to the state by keeping these animals around longer, that's some serious money. One of the things I tried to back into is going, well, if we're going to add another $1 billion to $1.5 billion, that means we're going to have access to the financing to keep them around and pay those costs that get us there. And I think that's one of the big changes we're going to have to settle on in the state is how are we going to come up with that extra $1 billion and $1.5 billion in financing, and an industry we're not used to financing, and understand those new risks. From a young producer's perspective, and being a teacher here at the university, I have a strong stake in seeing some of our alumnus go back and go to the family farm. With that equipment, you start up a 400 head finishing feedlot, you're talking $500,000 to $600,000 just right off the bat in terms of inventory, plus another $1,000 a day in feeding and medical costs, etc. So it's going to take some serious dollars, and I'm glad we've got a couple from the financial industry on the panel. The last note I'd make as I look to the future, if we were to get into the processing industry, I think these are critical from what we know, is we're going to have to develop a little bit of a different mentality about the infrastructure that we have. I think if you look, and a lot of facilities, the age in those is going to be 40 to 50 years of age when you do the projections. The future, 25 to 30%, you've got to be thinking that of being exported out of Missouri to international markets. We're going to have to access to quality co-products. We have those now. Can we improve those and make those better? We're going to have to lower the feed-to-gain ratio on our animals. And that's just not for Missouri, but that's for the cattle industry overall, to be competitive out there with other proteins. On the environmental side, is it going to be a state decision or a federal decision going forward? And I think Missouri can play a critical role in defining that on there. And the last thing is, I think we have to think about how we're going to coordinate the system. The beef industry is not like the pork or poultry industry, where you have those entities out there willing to finance a lot of the animals. Will that change? Is there an opportunity there to do something different so those new producers don't have to bite off that kind of financial implication in there? So I'll conclude with those comments.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here. Certainly, so my name is Scott Brown, on the faculty here at the Agriculture Economics Department. I start by, it's a great time to discuss the future of the cattle industry. It doesn't take long when you talk about 4 and 5 weight cattle that peaked at $3.30 a pound in late 2014, to talk about what's a very good time. And frankly, you could look in 2015 and say, we're not done seeing the peak in terms of calf prices in front of us. Equally, slaughter cattle prices that have been $1.70 at times in 2014. Just phenomenal period of time for the cattle industry, and it's really been a good period of time for the Missouri cattle industry in particular. I look at cow-calf returns and realize that we're roughly at 4 times the historical average returns for cow-calf producers. I often say, these are unimaginable levels just a few years ago. To think back that in June of 2013, we had 4 or 5 weight calves bringing $1.70 a pound to go all the way to $3.30. I think if I would have, in June of 2013, suggested we were headed to $3.30, everybody would have laughed in the room and we would have left. It is an incredible period of time for the industry. I kind of look ahead and go, can we grow the cattle industry here in Missouri? I often hear about all of the reasons why it's going to be difficult to grow in front of us. So for a minute, as I make my comments this morning, I was trying to look at what data is available for us to make better decisions about where we go forward in terms of the beef industry. So taking information from USDA, so they now give us satellite imagery where we can get some estimate of the acres of pasture land available in Missouri for cow-calf producers. It has declined. To me, it's not surprising it's declined over the last few years. According to that data, from 2006 to 2013, we lost about 1.5 million acres of pasture land from that satellite imagery information available to us. That may seem like that's a real limiting factor to growth in front of us, but when I looked at the data from that satellite imagery, 2013, we still had 12.6 million acres of pasture land in Missouri. I still say there's enough available pasture land to grow beef cow inventories as we look ahead. I will often say a growing concern for me is that I don't think it takes a PhD in agriculture economics to be concerned about lower prices ahead. These have been phenomenal prices. I think there's downside risk to where cattle prices go over the next, and I'm not suggesting months, I'm suggesting years. How do we prepare ourselves for lower calves or cattle prices ahead? What risk management tools do we provide to Missouri cattle producers to try to really offset the potential for lower prices as we move ahead? That's one that I really think is important for the industry to come to grips with when we look ahead, because the old extension adage, the cure for high prices is high prices, certainly may play a role in this. So starting to look at feeding cattle. Again, I was looking for what data is available to help me make more informed information available on feeding cattle. If you look at data from the Livestock Marketing Information Center, been in business for a long time in Denver, Colorado, they would say over the 2005 to 2014 period, feeding cattle in this country lost on average $6.40 a hundred. 2012 was a tough period of time. 2012 certainly sticks out as a period where it was tough in the feed yard business, but you start to look around large feed yards that have closed. We can look at the Cargill plant in Texas, roughly 62,000 head capacity. Hayes Feeders in Kansas, another 28,000. Industry estimates would suggest we've lost about 2,000 feed yards just in 2013 alone. So it has been a segment of the cattle industry that's been under pretty intense pressure with the record high crop prices of 2012 and 2013. Feeding average cattle probably has not been financially rewarding to the industry, especially given record prices. What about feeding cattle here in Missouri? Weather and rainfall and mud has certainly been an issue that we've had to deal with in the state. I suspect many of the former feed yards that we had in Missouri, frankly, didn't have a lot of risk management available as well. So a lot of them buying calves with little risk management got them caught at multiple times during the 70s and 80s and 90s. I think success in terms of feeding cattle in front of us ultimately comes down to the cost of feeding under roof relative to a Western feed yard mentality. If that technology reduces costs and eliminates maybe the economic advantage that was available from feeding in areas with less precipitation, it certainly may provide an opportunity for us to grow the feeding industry here in Missouri. But I'd come back to just remind us all, over the last several years, feeding cattle has proven difficult everywhere in the U.S. From a processing side, I say we have a very small presence today in feeding cattle, tend to be niche focused. When I say a small presence. I don't mean a unsuccessful presence at all. But certainly we have not been a large packing state by any sort. If you look at the national scene for a minute, we've lost 200 beef packing plants over the past 37 years, according to industry estimates. New plants that barely were operational have had trouble in states like Mississippi and South Dakota. The plant in South Dakota in particular, I hear, was very advanced in terms of technology employed in that plant, yet found it difficult to survive. I just remind us there are economies of scale in beef processing plants. Now, I think another plant deserves a little bit of discussion at this point. The Lime Springs beef plant, the old Tama plant in Iowa that's trying to operate, if they get up to speed, I think they're currently estimating they want to feed about process about 100 cattle a day. They do talk about a niche as well. Their niche is quality. They expect a majority of the cattle that they'll process will grade upper 2/3 choice or prime, and they feel like they have markets that are willing to pay economic incentives for that focus on a quality market. When I look back here at Missouri, it really, I think, comes home very nicely in that let's remain focused on some of the successes that we have seen here in Missouri. I start by the Show Me Select Heifer program. There's a lot of folks in the room who have had their hands in the Show Me Select Heifer program over time. Record-setting prices of the sales that occurred here in the fall of 2014 of over $3,000 a head. Show Me Select bred heifers, when you look at them over the 2010 to 2014 period, brought on average $400 a head more than Oklahoma City bred heifers over the same period of time. So even from a base, we've done a wonderful job in terms of creating better heifers to add into the cow herd, both in the state of Missouri and around the country. If you look at that Show Me Select data even a little bit further, you'll see that focus on better genetics has paid off. Tier 2 being one of the higher tiers for the Show Me Select program would suggest bred heifers that meet the Tier 2 requirements and are AI bred brought an additional $400 over the base or Tier 1 natural service sired Show Me Select heifers. So value relative to the average in the country and value relative to those that were the lower Tier 1 certainly shows what the payoff is for a focus on better genetics. You know, I like to say consumers will ultimately drive the makeup of the beef industry, and consumers in this country and around the world are going to matter. It's been a decades-long problem of the lack of coordination from the cow-calf producer to the plate. Whoever solves this problem will likely be the big winner. It makes me ask the question, are Missouri cow-calf producers willing to commit their calves to cattle feeders in Missouri? Are cattle feeders in Missouri willing to commit their cattle to a Missouri packing plant? I think both of those have to be answered yes for the success we need in growing the cattle industry here in Missouri. If you look at consumer demand for a minute, and we come back to that quality target, some data that we've been working with recently here on campus that shows us USDA data on loads of beef by quality grade. Some of the estimation that we've done will say a few things. Number one, prime beef is the most owned price elastic, and sorry I had to use an economic term here for a second this morning. What's that really mean for us? Growing supplies of prime has a less of an effect in terms of a reduction on the price of prime. More elastic we are, the easier it is for us to talk about smaller declines in prime prices. The old adage, if we increase prime supplies, we'd reduce the economic benefit, probably doesn't hold if those estimates are correct. There are non-economic trends very important in that quality data. Strong positive demand for prime and choice branded suggests those are growing demand markets for us. Being able to hit those targets probably helps us being more successful, and a negative trend for select suggests, again, a focus towards quality could be helpful. Pork and chicken. I think we're going to see lower pork and chicken prices in the next couple of years, are stronger substitutes for select beef than for choice or prime beef. I think all of that is important for us as we think about the future of the industry. And can we hit those quality targets is really the last piece of what I want to talk about this morning. Seems like to me there's a lot of technology. And, I was going to start by saying it's new technology, but frankly, technology that's been here for a while on the genetic and genomics areas. I see it a lot from our Department of Animal Sciences folks here on campus. Just takes me a minute to go to the Thompson Research Center in Spicker to say, we can hit those quality targets. 30% of the steer calves at Thompson grading prime over the last 5 years is phenomenal relative to the average of less than 5% of carcasses grading prime nationwide. Those cattle, those steer calves, we added $100 on average to their value by feeding them because of the genetic base of those animals. The last thing I'll say is the range, even of a farm like Thompson Farm, from a minus $100 return to over $400 tells you there's a lot of variability in the herd left yet today. And a focus on those calves that are at the upper end of the quality side, the upper end of the feed efficiency side, is certainly something that we need to be focused on as we grow the industry here in Missouri. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Ron Plain. Like my two colleagues, I'm a faculty member in the Department of Ag Economics and glad to be here. I've been on the faculty almost 34 years now, and it's never been as much fun to talk to cattle producers as it is this year. It's a great time to be in the cattle business. And Missouri's, has been mentioned several times, is number 2 in cow-calf production. We are, occasionally we slide if it gets dry here and wet in Oklahoma to number 3, but we are a big cow-calf state because if you've traveled across the state, we got a lot of grass. 9.3 million acres of pasture in this state. And the highest and best use for most of that is grazing, and cattle's the most profitable grazer we have most years, and so we have a large cow-calf herd. Now, I want to talk a bit about what is sometimes called money illusion, this concept that maybe there's a lot of benefit to be gained by moving farther down the supply chain or whatever. Missouri cattle produces a calf, sells it for $1,000 to a feedlot in Kansas, and they feed it for a while and sell it for $1,500 to a packing plant. Dollar-wise, Kansas gets to claim $1,500 worth of cattle sales. Missouri gets to claim $1,000. It looks like their industry is 50% larger than ours, but realize the first $1,000 that Kansas feedlot spends is to pay Missouri $1,000. And so what Missouri cattlemen added was $1,000 from no calf to $1,000 calf. What Kansas did is took it from $1,000 to $1,500. The value added component of the Missouri cattle industry is double the size of the cattle industry in Kansas, if you look at it that way, on that one example. Now, the next issue is what's the best use of this grass? We've got this grass and we want to, is it more backgrounding and making calves bigger, or is it, as Scott was referring to, making quality calves? Right now, the profits in this industry is accruing at the front end. The cow-calf sector has had a great year. LMIC that Scott referred to out of Denver says average cash flow positive per mama cow 2014 of $490 per head, which breaks the old record of $160 per head. The forecast for next year is $480. It's a great time to be in the cow-calf business. And I would argue that what we need to be working on is how to maximize the returns to that. And a lot of it has to do, again, back to that forage base, trying to maximize the carrying capacity, getting the most pounds of calf and the highest quality calves we can get out of that. May offer more opportunity for bottom line profits than trying to add more pounds per animal rather than more animals. Simply look at where we are in the number of calves we produce. If we simply go back to producing as many calves this year in 2015 as we did 10 years earlier, that'd be $400 million more income to cow-calf producers in the cattle industry in the state, and that involves basically pasture management, quality forage, better management from the cattle producer to utilize that forage, intensive grazing, all those things that we know about but don't do as well as we can. Longer term, I'd second what Scott referred to, quality beef. If you look at the U.S., we're the biggest, fourth biggest beef exporter in the world, but primarily we export grain-fed beef, quality beef. That's our niche, and those things that we can do that improves the quality of the eating experience, the quality of beef that comes from the calves born in this state, I think long-term has an opportunity to add to our profit levels. With that, I think I'm ready to turn it over to Jeff.
I'm Jeff. Can y'all? Is it okay? I'm Jeff Case with Robo Agri-Finance here in the state of Missouri. We finance ag inputs. We do all types of ag. We're an ag lender. Have significant assets in proteins, including beef cattle. An example being that in Kansas, there's 2.1 million fed cattle in inventory. We directly finance about 700,000 of those cattle. So we appreciate the meeting today, Director, and certainly have a vested interest. I appreciate the quality of folks you've got in this room. You have producers, academia, and government, and I think that everybody here should take advantage of that network that's here. I see a lot of friends out here, quality beef producers, and I think some of them would agree with me, if not most of them, that when you talk about quality of cattle, we're number one as far as cow-calf producers go. A friend of mine, Mr. Barnett, sitting there would certainly agree with that. I think that's important to Scott's comments, that we continue to capitalize on that quality. We do have a higher quality calf coming off the farm now than we've had in the past. We certainly have room for improvement. But as we look forward to finishing, harvesting, and branding products, that quality is going to continue to be important as we move up the value chain. And I think Mr. Wood and some of the others will talk about that on panels after this one. But appreciate the opportunity to answer any questions.
Good morning. Can you all hear me? Okay. My name is Dave Janish. I'm with FCS Financial. We're a between a $3.5 billion agricultural lender here in the state of Missouri. We cover roughly 102 counties of the state. And, the success of the beef industry is critically important to us, obviously. About between 25 and 30% of our loan portfolio is involved in the livestock protein sector. So we are extremely interested in the success of beef in Missouri and how we can expand that. The problem you have being fifth on a panel of five is how do you add value after all these things, and so I'll do the best I can. Part of the questions that we were asked to address is things related to employment and those kind of things. And I'm still trying to figure out how an ag lender got in a panel with 3 PhDs. So I look at it fairly simple, and that is if we can make the beef industry successful, the employment and the sales tax and all that kind of stuff will take care of itself. And so, I don't want to duplicate a lot of the comments and the statistics that a lot of folks talked about today. So I'll probably come at it maybe from a little different perspective than the feeding and the processing and the harvesting and all that stuff. Because as an agricultural lender, we're really about primarily deploying capital and managing risk, understanding and managing risk in the industry. And so some of the things that I think are important to the beef industry, and we have a few of these tools, but really are the risk management tools. We see the LRP program and in the farm program, hedging, those kind of things, those types of tools are critically important to the organization. A lot of times, profit and loss is determined at the day that the calf is bought or sold. And so risk management at the producer level and having those tools are critically important to the beef industry, just like they are to crop industry or any other industry. If you look at the natural resources in the state of Missouri, it really tends to lend itself very well to cow-calf operations and backgrounding operations. The land and the climate are really suited very well for cow-calf operations. There's good feed production, availability of forage, hay, those kinds of things. So, there's probably not a big surprise that we're number 2 or number 3, depending on the state, in the year in cow-calf production. I think the other challenges we have, though, is that there's other successful parts of the protein livestock sector. We talked about poultry, swine, that also have competition for the corn and the crops that we do raise in the state. Likewise, we are blessed with having easy access to water, rivers, and those things for exporting some of these products, the corn and soybeans, out of the state. So there are some challenges and competition to the beef industry for those resources as well. And so perhaps the best opportunity that we may have is what we already do very well. And that is build on our strengths. We have central location, good feed sources, good quality of cow herd. All those things have been discussed. And I think continuing in that and looking at how we can become even better. As you look at beef consumption, competition from poultry, swine, those kind of things, I think the quality of the beef was going to be extremely important. Especially with the American diet, and as we hear about some of our exports, and as the middle class grows in other countries. I think some of the areas that the beef industry also can benefit from is over the last several years, due to the high crop prices, there's been a lot of land that was grass that was put into cropland, and it's somewhat marginal cropland. So I think things that we can do to maybe look at assisting and enhancing the ability, encouraging the ability to put some of that marginal cropland back into grass to expand the cow herds in Missouri would be helpful. Some of our existing programs that we have are capped either by numbers or dollars. If we look at the LRP program, there's limits as to the numbers of cows that can be enrolled in that. And so I know some of these things are outside of the scope of the state and those kind of things, but I mean from an industry standpoint, I think these are pretty important to us as we look going forward. We talked a little bit about the young, beginning folks wanting to get into the industry. From our perspective as a lender, the cow-calf operation has really kind of been an avenue by which young, beginning small farmers can get into agriculture. The cost of entry is significant, but it's not as high as it is in some other parts of the industry. So certainly, I think encouraging that, providing some capabilities, either through the financing or programs that the state can bring together to help some of those programs, some of those producers would certainly be beneficial. But this is all with its challenges, obviously. We have environmental, we have regulatory, we have social challenges that come about as part of this as well that will have to be overcome. But at the end of the day, I think Missouri's well positioned I think it's really just conversations like this to bring the industry together and figure out how we can move this forward. Thank you.
Let's give everyone a hand for their comments today. Well, now's the time that I think probably at each one of these panels, I think we're going to have an opportunity to interact, ask questions, pose some ideas out there that we can have some discussion on. And we do have folks that are going to run mics to you, so you don't have to yell real loud. So if you have a question, I'd ask you to please stand, and we'll get to you. So is there any questions at this moment for any of these panelists that someone would like to ask? Okay, go ahead, Tom, and then...
A couple of questions for the economist part of it. We talked about the export part of the segment and how important it is. And there's two questions here. On the export side, do you have numbers on the percentage of exports that we export out of the beef industry? Is it for the prime part of the beef, or is it on more? And how many pounds is it towards the select part? Are we exporting the prime cuts, the high dollar cuts, or is more of our exports on the offal or the secondary cuts? Question number two, in the price rise that we've had, is it the pound of beef that is consumed have gone up per the person in the country, or is it on the sheer lack of numbers that we have had, the lack of numbers of the beef industry? Could you answer those questions for us?
I'll take the second one and let Ron have the first one. How's that? Well, so I certainly think when you look at the record prices that we've had today, the supply side of the industry has been very important. The fact that we've been at the lowest level of cattle and calves for decades has a lot to do with the fact there are record prices. However, it's not just the supply side that's been the driver. Demand has been incredibly strong at what has been record prices. I always say, don't forget that consumption isn't a measure of demand. It's the relative price and consumption bundle that matters. So yes, we're consuming less beef today than we did a few years ago, but the price we're willing to pay for that less consumption suggests to me that demand for beef in total has been stronger over the last few years. Now you take that one step further and you try to start to look at what's demand for select look like. And when I plot those prices and consumption levels, it shows me that select demand has actually been shifting to the left. So demand has become weaker for select over the last couple of years. Whereas when you look at choice, and I tend to go upper two-thirds choice, if you will, and prime, those combinations of prices and consumption would suggest stronger demand. So I don't want to leave here this morning by saying Scott Brown said, hey, we got to record prices just because of the supply side of the industry. That's not true. And it's been some pretty strong demand that's done so. I'm always looking for those demand growth areas, and it seems like we have a logical one from a domestic situation to be beneficial to the industry.
With respect to trade, it's hugely important to agriculture and to the cattle industry. If you sort of want to separate the muscle meats, 10% tonnage-wise of what we produce in any given month gets exported. If you look at the byproducts, the liver, the kidneys, the tongues, the hides, I'm not sure what the percentage is. It's much higher. In total, about 20% of the value is coming from foreigners buying our product. As to quality, the number one long-term buyer of U.S. beef has been Japan, and they like quality beef. They buy the good stuff, the high choice and the prime, at a higher rate than U.S. consumers do. On sort of keep in mind that quality, to put some numbers with the per capita consumption. 1976, the average American ate 94 pounds of beef. Last year, 54 pounds, 40 pounds per person less. The future of the cattle industry, in my mind, is not so much more tonnage as quality. That's where there's more opportunity to get income to pay the bills, is in quality. That's where our competitive niche on the world market is. And, I just don't see us pushing that per capita consumption back anywhere close to those 90 pounds we did in the mid-'70s. And so it's a matter of capturing value, consumer dollars for a high-quality product. I think that's where opportunity lies from the state.
And as I add on to that, as we see a population growing across the world, per capita consumption is maybe not the driving factor. It's the number of people that are eating. And I think that's going to be very, very important for us to keep track of going into the future of how we're going to feed more people. And one of the things, and I read reports all the time too, as far as our export demand. The last report I got was in 2014, we hit right at $400 of every fed steer and heifer in the United States is being exported, the value of that. So record value in every carcass is being exported. So, when we talk about 20% of the value of a carcass being shipped out of this country, it's pretty important to our industry, not only as beef, cow, calf people, but anybody in our industry. The 20% is crucial to us to be able to maintain and increase that demand. Other questions? Back here in the corner, Mike.
Great job to all of you. Mike Deering with Missouri Cattlemen's. My question, Dr. Brown, in terms of processing, you referenced the Mississippi plant and the South Dakota plant, which I guess for lack of a better word failed. And Dr. Plain, you mentioned Mississippi. Could you elaborate on those two scenarios a little bit more for us, and in terms of how those plants came to be and why they failed?
The Mississippi plant, about 2002 or 3, the cattle producers in Mississippi, which like Missouri doesn't do a lot of cattle feeding, but has a substantial cow herd, decided to be real good to have a cow kill plant in their state, and the state of Mississippi thought that would be a good investment, and they put in $60 million or something, built a brand new plant. It operated for about 3.5 months and then went broke. And that was a decade ago, I guess. And as far as I know, it's still available if you're wanting to buy it. But everybody in here who's in the cattle business knows prices are high. And prices are high because there's not that many cattle out there. And there's not that many cattle out there. Owning a packing plant isn't, that's not the time to do it, because, we got more slaughter capacity in the United States than we got cattle to kill. And that's going to be the case for quite a few more years, because the biology of cattle dictate we cannot expand calf numbers quickly. It's a 9-month gestation period and darn near 2 years to reach slaughter. And so cattle numbers are going to grow slowly, and the profits of running a slaughter plant is going to be very tough. As I think Scott alluded to, we've shut down 4 big slaughter plants in the last 2 years, just trying to get back in balance kill capacity with the number of animals out there that are going to need slaughtered.
I'd just add a few comments I think that are important. Number one, I have a hunch if you look at the big packers around the room today, they're probably looking at each other going, who's going to close the next plant right now? It's not one of adding plants in terms of just how tough the economics are. So I'm sure it's a pretty stressful time, even for those that have been in the business for a long period of time, of thinking about who might be next to exit the industry. From my standpoint, I look at the South Dakota plant, I think it was one that technologically was well advanced. So in terms of a cost efficiency standpoint, it was probably able to compete very well, yet finding enough supply of cattle to run through that plant, even with some interest from South Korea in trying to get that plant running yet again, just goes to show you it's a tough lift to get in the processing business. Now, I don't say not to do it. I'll come back from a Missouri perspective and say, if you're going to get in the processing business, you better have shackle space already spoken for every day of the year you want to operate that plant. We better keep it at 100% to have a chance of running it. Are we ready in this state to make that commitment to a processing industry. And if we are, maybe it's the opportunity to get in. But if that plant has to go out and secure cattle, right now the competition for cattle to fill that plant is just incredible.
Great question. Other questions? I think we've got a question back over here. Dr. Sexton, she's bringing a mic.
My question is actually for the lenders. You mentioned that the cow-calf operation is a better entry point for young people. I'm curious, as it relates to increased feeding capacity and the like, kind of the topic here today, what does a good portfolio look like for a young person to get into the cattle feeding industry that would make that more attractive than, say, a cow-calf operation to you as a lender?
Actually, I think from our perspective, the cow-calf is actually a better entry point for young producers. From our perspective, just the cost of entry is somewhat lower on that perspective.
I guess, how do you make it? What does the feeding operation look like that is more attractive than a cow-calf? I agree. I'm giving you the agreement that cow-calf is an entry point. What does a good portfolio for a young person look like to get into a feeding industry? What is the limitation? If you're not a land baron and you're not purchasing land, how does the feeding operation become a better entry point for you as a lender?
From the standpoint of the land, the cost of the land is a barrier of entry for the young producer, and frequently this can be done through renting of pasture land, forage, and so it's just a simpler process from that. And I'm not sure if I'm getting to your question. Do you have any?
The part of the question is what is the problem with feeding industries from a lending perspective? It would seem that they would potentially have a greater cash flow, or at least a more than one time a year type of cash flow. Is it the security of the land or the risk of the depreciable assets of feeding and those type of things?
You have tighter margins typically in feeding operations, and so the risk profile is different than that of, say, the cow-calf producer, and so you have to have ways to mitigate that risk. Anytime the risk profile is greater, it's harder to enter that as a young producer because you don't have that balance sheet to be able to handle the additional risk associated with that. So in this state, we have a reputation of working with younger producers through the Missouri Ag and Small Business Development Authority, also through USDA programs for not grants, but for guarantees that help offset that risk.
All right. There's some other questions. When you ask your question, if you'd identify who you are, that'd be great. Kind of gives us a perspective, and we appreciate it. Also, we have posted some things on the Missouri Beef Council Facebook page. So if there's people that are listening to this live, if you'll get your questions back to us through that Facebook post, we'll be more than happy to ask our panelists as well, for those that aren't here.
Merle Breyer, and this is to Dr. Brown. When we were at the Missouri Livestock Symposium, you gave a little breakdown on pasture prices and pasture rental. I think that's applicable to what we're talking about today. Could you kind of give this crowd a little overview of what you told us there, of your projection over the next several years of pasture values, pasture prices, and possibly pasture rental values?
Sure. So I think when you look at pasture rental rates, there's going to be some pressure as we move ahead for those rates to move higher. I hear a lot of variability, and I'm going to give Ron a chance to think about. I know we do survey of pasture rental rates. I'll let him talk about exactly where we sit here in Missouri, but I know there's a lot of variability in those rates. I hear some still low ones of anywhere from $30 to $70 an acre. As I go across the state looking or listening to different folks, I think that with the $450 returns that we see in 2014, if we back those up with another plus 400 in 2015, the demand for land, for pasture, for cow-calf producers is only going to go up, and you hear that as you kind of move around. I go on top of that. We've talked a little bit about risk, and the livestock forage program hasn't gotten a lot of discussion, but the fact that for many producers around the state of Missouri, we've probably put another $50 to $100 a cow in their returns in 2014 from making those retroactive payments under the livestock forage program has done nothing but also provide some pressure up on pasture rental rates. I think as long as we continue to see cattle prices where they are, calf prices where they are today, we're going to continue to see some upward pressure in pasture rental. And perhaps we get in a situation where some of the most marginal land that we converted to crops a few years ago, chasing $7 plus corn, might find it more attractive to come back. Again, that's all going to depend on fence and water as to whether or not we can see some of that land converted. And I'll say, coming from northwest Missouri, every acre of pasture we plowed up in the 70s and 80s never was put back in pasture to the best of my knowledge. So I'm not up here suggesting that all the land that we have been cropping the last few years will come back. But less pasture land available, higher cattle prices, for me, suggest pasture rates are headed higher for the next few years.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything Scott said. Put some numbers with it. USDA puts out an annual value cash rental rates for the state of Missouri, basically $30 per acre for pasture, $130 per acre on cropland. Those numbers, a lot of people, a lot of farmers tell me are too low. Keep in mind that USDA survey includes everyone, and there's a number of related party transactions. That is, grandma renting her farm to her grandson at a very accommodating rate that gets included in those surveys, and I think pulls the average down a little lower than you would expect. But I agree with Scott. I'm optimistic about more good years of profits in the cow-calf business this state, and that's probably going to push up rental rates.
And I think just recently our neighbors to the north, of course, we see astronomical crop rental prices up there, but I've also starting to hear $100 to $150 an acre prices for pasture ground. So it's unbelievable what these good prices and this demand will do. Other questions? We have some more time. Over here. Have we got?
My name is Barry Combs, and I'm working with my two sons, and we were wanting to build a confinement cattle barn. And I guess this question would be for the Director of Agriculture or the Governor. I've been to checked with the NRCS offices and different agencies trying to get some help to build the barn, as far as building a complete barn, and I haven't had any luck with that. But there's parts of it they will take help with, but as far as the waste to protect our watershed, that's one reason why we were looking at a confinement type barn to do this with. And they're in Iowa, Minnesota, and South Dakota. They all have programs for this, and I'm wondering if the state of Missouri is looking at anything to help to start these kind of confinement type buildings.
Director Fordyce, do you want to address that this time?
Sure, that's a great question, and we've certainly had a number of conversations as it pertains to federal agencies. We've had conversations with NRCS and talking to them about the availability of funding and the opportunity to assist, whether, if nothing else, from an engineering standpoint, how they could help from that. I think that as we move forward, and I think in the pretty near future, we're going to try to figure out something and the viability of something that the state can do to offer assistance. But we have had conversations with NRCS and the folks there to gauge the interest of NRCS engaging at a little higher level. So we are working on that. A definite answer, I guess, today would be difficult to provide, but we are looking at opportunities, whether it be through federal agencies or programs here through the state. So I guess stay tuned would be the answer.
All right, further questions? Yes, back here against the wall. And introduce yourself, please.
Richard Thomas from Monroe County, farm operator. It seems like we're talking about risk involved in doing these things, and the risk for the folks that are involved at the basic level. If we looked at the averages, the average cattle owner is getting up in years, and they're become a little risk adverse when you look at the numbers that the average cattle guy has is less than 3 dozen head. To get into expanding into feeding a little further, you're adding a lot of cost to a calf that you're selling for $1,300. Looking at the possibility of adding a couple $100 to that and then selling at a profit when you're going to have to invest some money per head in capacity to do that. And I think that a lot of folks, myself included, have seen a lot of silos that have been used for feeding that are no longer in use. You see some feed yards around that are no longer in use, and you're going to take the risk of competing with those folks that have been there, done that, and it hasn't worked out for them. That's a tough go. Add on to that the opportunity to get a permit to do some of these things, and you hear a lot of stories about not only to get a permit, but then becoming liable for a nuisance situation because of setback, odor, a whole list of things that are promoted by those folks that can make a living off of adversary kinds of relationships. Folks aren't going to buy into that. I'm not. I have kids involved in farming, and I'm not going to suggest that they expose themselves to that kind of a risk when the cow-calf business is working very well now, as well as crop farming.
Okay, thank you so much for your comments. And I think one of the things, and Director Fordyce talked about it today, is there's going to be a lot of opportunity to discuss. And what I hope is that as we try to look into the future, Mr. Thomas, is that if we can provide opportunities for people in cow-calf or something else. We have, with our 53,000 beef producers, one thing we don't need is everybody feeding cattle. That would be not, I think, advantageous to our state. And if anybody else wants to comment on this, they're more than welcome to. I think it's hard to look into our crystal balls in 20 years or 30 years down the road what our industry will look like and what it should look like. And I think the best thing in the world is we've got this first step today to start identifying either technology opportunities, feeding opportunities, value-adding opportunities, because it may cost to get $1 billion more in sales. It may cost us $1 billion or more to get that in sales. So I think everybody here has that idea of it may or may not work for me, but where are the opportunities? And there will be times for opportunities. And I think you'll hear later today from our, from the people that help us and work with us through the Department of Natural Resources. They're here at the table today to also talk about how they will interface and how that will impact and how we can work through the regulatory process on the environmental side to make it work or to not make it work. And we have to make it work for them as well. Other questions? We have just a few more minutes. Yes, back here.
I don't know if I want to give my name or not, seeing as how my CEO is sitting on the panel up there. But, I'm Joe Abbott with FCS Financial, and I work with a tremendous amount of larger backgrounders and finishers, and some of them are here in this room. The biggest challenge we see is, or that I see in working with them, is the risk management portion of this. You can ask David Patton or Justin Angel or anybody else in here if a potload of calves today is going to cost you about $110,000. Okay, cow-calf man's making $450 a head. That background, or to encourage a cow-calf man to keep those calves a little longer, to add another $100 maybe into his pocket. Right now, to put an LRP on that is about $45 a head. To carry it on up to finishing, you're talking about adding LRP is about $80 a head, today's prices. Having only been subsidized about 13%, where crop revenue assurance is subsidized about 65%, would there be an opportunity to work with the Department of Ag in looking at some assistance on that LRP to encourage more? Because I would have more people continuing to increase the backgrounding or adding weight to these calves in Missouri, as well as potentially finishing them. You know, we've got a gentleman like Mike Webb here whose demand to finish cattle here in the state of Missouri, right here in central Missouri, is there, does a very good job. But that marketing, the risk management, is a very hard point to get around today. And so I was just wanted to give you all the input from those perspective that is a challenge we see.
Good point, Joe. I mean, great high cattle prices are great, but man, it's risky. I mean, you're playing with lots of dollars out there, and yes, if you look at crop insurance, it's been overwhelmingly successful. 90% of our corn acres in this state are insured, and I think about the same number on soybeans. And one of the reasons is the government subsidy on that. It's a very high level, and I wish it was higher on LRP. And as long as we're talking about insurance programs, the pasture range and forage program that is offered by USDA is subsidized at a 50-some% level, which provides an opportunity for cattlemen who have grass or produce hay to cover some of that risk associated with 2012 type years, and cover it under a program with a high level of subsidy, so that you in essence buy risk protection and without having to foot the whole bill yourself. So yeah, those are programs that I think are a lot more cattlemen should be taken advantage of, and it would be nice if the Missouri Department of Agriculture somehow could make it a little bit more financially attractive.
I would just add, from the 2014 Farm Bill as well, there's a lot more effort on new insurance products from the federal side, that perhaps we shouldn't limit ourselves to thinking about how do we make LRP better, but what are the other kinds of programs out there that might have federal interest that we could work with RMA in developing, because again, with the 2014 Farm Bill, there was a lot more emphasis on new insurance products that I think might be helpful in this case. So I wouldn't want us to automatically limit to what can we do in Missouri, but think more broadly about those risk management alternatives. And I come back to go, so we got price risk management that's very tough right now. That I get, I go, there's other risk management as well, and I come back to go, I don't want to have to feed average cattle or below average cattle, and we have an opportunity to use the Missouri cow-calf industry to help ourselves there. If I could make the dice make sure they didn't throw sevens by the investment I make in genetics or genomics technology that's available today, that's another way I can reduce risk besides the price risk that I face today that I think is important. And I may have automatically got us down the road of thinking about that from a quality perspective, but I go, it's across the board. We need cattle that convert efficiently and are quality altogether, and those opportunities to work on the technologies that I think are coming on board from a genetics genomics technology does nothing but help us on that risk management. So we can't directly deal with price perhaps in that situation, but we can help what are, I think, some other big risk that feeding cattle we have in place today.
All right. About one more question before we get to a break. Is there another question out there? Everybody's wanting to take a break? All right. 15 minutes. And be back in your seat, and we will start in 15 minutes, whether you're here or not. Thank you.